20 years ago.
Yeah,
You know,
yes.
so how then can
Yeah.
we inject 21st century thinking into the 13th century, and meaning that we are supposing, those that want to suggest that the Shroud is an artwork, they have you know, come up with all kinds of you know, technologies that someone could have come up with to artificially create this image, but begs the question of why would they? And they just flat out couldn't have, because you're asking this artist to literally put their minds into a different century.
Yes.
And it's just not possible. Any more than you listening right now can project yourself and think about what the 22nd century is going to be like.
Yeah.
You can't. You just can't do it.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
and so you know, so there's always the cultural time barrier that
that's
you can't
excellent,
cross.
Ross. Excellently said. Because one of the basic qualities of art is that it precisely and absolutely fits into its own age. Nobody paints something completely out of his own age.
And the striking thing about the Shroud is that, again, alleging that it's something crafted by the artist in the 1300s would suggest then that, well, we don't know, we haven't seen anything like it before or since.
Yeah.
It just kind of drops in from outer space almost.
Yes,
And so from that standpoint, it just does not in any way fit the artistic milieu of the 1300s, or even if you, and I think that there's quite a bit of evidence now to show that it was in Constantinople, and so even from a Byzantine context, which even, you know, Byzantine artwork had even less realism than say Roman art did.
Yes.
You know, so the you know, so, and all of this discussion related to this being medieval is again, those, because we do have, there is a kind of there is a gap, let's say, in the history. It shows up, we have a fully documented historical trail from 1356 until now, and then we have a documented trail of another cloth with an image on it that it sure sounds like the Shroud, that has a history from 6th century to 1204, when it disappeared during the Fourth Crusade. So the discussion here is that, okay, well, how can we prove that what disappeared in Constantinople is the same cloth that appears in Lorraine, France in 1356? So we have this 150-year gap where the history is not perfectly continuous, and so there are those that would allege that the Shroud is that whatever disappeared in Constantinople has got nothing to do with the Shroud, and what appeared in 1356 must be the work of some medieval artist. So that's just some background to this whole discussion. It's okay. Now I want to talk to you about something else. In the chemistry side, our Walter Macron has alleged that the blood is not blood, but is vermilion paint. Now, let me give it a sidebar to this. On Shroud University is a podcast. You can listen to it. It's a debate between Dr. Gil Lavoie and Walter Macron, where they discuss this. And you have blood chemists Al Adler and John Heller, who analyze the blood. They say it's blood. Now, these are blood chemists. That's what they do. They analyze blood. And now you have Walter Macron, who says, oh, no, it's not blood. It's vermilion. Now, if you dig down a little bit deeper than that, you'll realize that the techniques of analyzing the particles was completely different, and that Macron left. They have these microscope slides of they took sticky tape samples and pulled, you know, threads and fibers and debris up on this tape, and they applied these tape samples to microscope slides. Okay, and so Macron was given some of these slides to look at, but he did not remove the particles from the acetate tape. He analyzed the particles through the tape, And when you're using a refraction microscope, however that thing works, and I'm a generalist. I don't know all things about all this, but all I know is that when you analyze the particles through the tape, it gives you a completely different index, of what's called a refraction index. Now, what Adler and Heller did, they removed the blood particles from the tape, cleaned it with a solution to get off all of the glue from the tape, and then did their analysis. And so the question is, how could Macron come up with one idea that it's paint, and Adler and Heller come up with a whole different determination that it's blood? Well, you have, obviously Heller and Adler did a much better job removing the particles from the slide to make sure that that's all they were looking at was just the particle, and not glue and not tape and not everything else. So Macron, some people may get upset about this, but in his laziness, he just left the particles on the tape, immersed in the glue, and did his analysis that way, and it came off with a completely different refraction index. So this is important to know. Now we have Macron saying it's vermilion. Now, as an artist, tell me about vermilion.
Vermilion. How can this man be a chemist? First and above all, it takes a paint chemist who is vastly different than a regular chemist. He should have known that vermilion is one of the most dangerous paint materials known to art. And most artists it's a brilliant, beautiful color, which is red, and yet some bluish tint comes through it. It's fabulous. But you use it, as I did on one of my prize-winning paintings. I was a very young artist, 12 years old. I won a first prize with a painting, took the painting home, looked at it the next day, and the face was black.
Oh my gosh.
The vermilion, through totally unknown reasons. Nobody knows. Even paint chemistry does not know why it turns suddenly black. And sometimes even by touching another paint, turns black.
So it's very unstable then.
Very, very unstable. It cannot be exposed to air, to sun, etc.
So it can't be exposed to air or sun, and yet we know that the Shroud has been publicly exhibited hundreds of times ever since, at least in Western Europe, ever since 1413. It's been exhibited publicly with, being held out to the open air into the sun. So if these alleged, if these paint stains, if these blood stains are, as Macron says, vermilion paint, they would be black as charcoal by now.
Oh, it's nobody in his right mind uses vermilion for these reasons. No matter how beautiful it is, it's very beautiful, but very, very dangerous.
Now, you did an experiment, it's either in this paper or another one, where you actually had a piece of linen, and you painted it with typical medieval paints, including vermilion. And what was your experience? What happened to the vermilion when you painted it on the unprepared flax?
Oh, it really doesn't even cover the canvas. No matter what you do, it just does not cover. And I didn't wait to see it until it turns black, but most probably it would have. And and vermilion does not have the color of blood. It has a completely different color. So why would he say that the blood was painted with vermilion? These are insane arguments.
So basically what we have here is a situation where Walter Macron finds a particle of vermilion on one of these microscope slides and says, aha, the blood must be made out of vermilion.
Yeah.
The problem is, what he didn't do, or chose not to do, is that he didn't look at the historical background of the Shroud, where we know that the Shroud has been literally touched we can document over 52 paintings that have been touched to the surface of the cloth, and you did an experiment to see whether those particles would actually fall off.
Yes, I was wondering how we could prove that the few paint particles which you find on the shroud were passed on to it by the true copies. And so I went into partnership with Dr. Köhler, who had a magnificent microscope with a camera on it, on top of it. And I painted little squares with all kinds of medieval materials, like just gum, glue, just water, egg tempera, egg oil tempera. These were the medieval techniques. And I painted some with oil. And I also left squares of the same linen untouched. They were pristine. And we passed the pristine canvas under the microscope and put on top of it the painted canvas face down and slightly rubbed it, not much, just as much as you would when you want to authenticate a copy. We pulled the thing off the microscope, looked at it, it looked like this starry sky filled with paint particles.
So
it was proven
so much
that,
had in fact, rubbed off.
Yeah, rubbed off completely. And not only that, but we were even be able to say which technique passed the most particles on the shroud, and they were the medieval techniques.
So the medieval art techniques had the most number of loose particles that would have gotten onto the cloth.
Yes, the later oil paints, the very early oil paint, which was mixed with egg tempera, they passed, but not too many. But the real hardcore oil paints, they didn't. So we cannot talk about
so
this.
that's a strong validation, using a valid experimental method that in fact these medieval paintings would have dislodged particulate matter onto the cloth, onto the shroud.
Yes.
So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. From Shroud University, this is Russ Brial bringing you another discussion on the Shroud of Turin, the greatest mystery of the known world. We are back with Isabel Piczek and myself, Russ Brial, with Shroud University and our video blog here. And as we said before the break, Isabel Piczek is a world-renowned artist, and we're discussing all things related to the Shroud and why it could or could not be the work of an artist. Because that is the alternative. What we have here, it either is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus or it's not. And if it's not, then what is it? So now there's a theory out there that's been popularized, and this, I think, gets some genesis from the belief that the Shroud is medieval, and which has, I'll acknowledge that it has been, that medieval date has been supported with carbon dating. That's a problem. And there are other areas on Shroud University. You need to go to the School of Chemistry and look at the articles there that deal with carbon dating. And this is not a discussion about that, but you need to know that in 2005, Ray Rogers, a chemist, took thread samples from the main body of the shroud, compared them chemically to thread samples taken from the corner, the one sample cut from the outside corner edge, and determined that they are not the same. Well, how in the world can this happen? How can you have thread samples from the same cloth and not be the same chemically? And so what we believe now is that that corner that was cut for carbon-14 dating was probably an area that was rewoven during the Middle Ages, because that corner was handled hundreds of times. And but you can read about some of that on the School of Chemistry, and watch some of the videos that are there. Suffice it to say, now carbon dating has been seriously called into question, and and since they violated the sampling protocol by taking only one sample instead of 3, so if they have a bad sample, what are you going to do? How can you prove? So they messed up, and having said that, so since there is the general belief out there in the world that the Shroud is medieval, then there have been those authors who have written books saying that the only artist capable to have produced something anywhere close to the Shroud of Turin was Leonardo da Vinci. But there's a problem. And the problem is that he wasn't born when the Shroud was first appeared in France in 1356. In fact, he was born 100 years later, right?
100 years later, yes.
And I don't think that this theory suggests that he invented time travel. So part of this Leonardo theory is that whatever was displayed in Lourdes, France in 1356, that was just a crude idea. And Leonardo captured that idea, and whatever that was disappeared, and then Leonardo decided to do his own shroud, almost as a self-portrait, if you will. So I wanted to have Isabel weigh in and discuss a little bit about Leonardo and his paint styles and techniques, and whether or not it's even conceivable that the shroud could be the work of Leonardo da Vinci.
If I ever have seen anything which is inconceivable, that is the Leonardo da Vinci theory. Somebody who says that doesn't know anything about the man Leonardo or his art. Forget it that he was born 100 years later. That's a good argument, but we can use up much, much heavier arguments. Leonardo was an extremely hesitant artist, extremely slow. Maybe the slowest artist in the history of art. How his patrons put up with that, I don't know. Mine certainly wouldn't. That I know from experience. But anyhow, that's why he was unable to paint murals, for instance, because to be a mural artist like I am, it takes a fast, very decisive person, because you only have hours to finish a fresco piece. And even if you paint with acrylics or some tempera, it takes a lot of strength and fastness to finish. He spoiled one mural and wall after the other. The Last Supper, within his lifetime, started to disintegrate, and he mixed all kinds of techniques, tempera with oil, watercolor, fresco, everything went
So he mixed all kinds of elements together.
Yes, because he just could not get himself to finish that painting. And now that it
But you're saying that within his lifetime, the Last Supper began to disintegrate.
To disintegrate, yes. Then forget the Last Supper, still fared much better, but the Battle of Anghiari, which he was supposed to paint in
the Battle of Anghiari?
Yes,
okay.
That was for the Palazzo, Florentine Palazzo, for the authorities. And one wall was given to Leonardo da Vinci, the other wall to Michelangelo. And they started at the same time. Boy, he needed that, because he looked up in one of the old Greek books technique, which was an oil paint. It suited his slowness better. And after the painting was done, you were supposed to carry huge bowls of boiling oil and put it underneath. And that was supposed to make the painting more permanent. First and above all, he only finished a small section, brought in the boiling oil, and the whole painting just went down. Yeah.
It just vanished.
Yeah, just vanished. He was incapable of getting himself to paint fast. Now, to paint the Shroud of Turin, even if it could be a painting, and I guarantee it couldn't be, it takes an artist who can paint what we call alla prima, not in coats, one coat.
One coat.
And you have to start on top and finish it on the bottom without lifting your finger.
Wow.
How could Leonardo da Vinci
Wow,
do
that's
that?
astonishing.
How could, and it shows no layers. His painting technique was layered, layer after layer. The Mona Lisa must have 1,000 layers, one after the
So you're saying Leonardo's technique was to have multiple layers.
Multiple
and
layers.
what we see on the
Yes.
Shroud is a single, well, it's not
Yes.
really a layer, it's just, you have each of these, when you get down to the microscope, you see that each fiber of
Yes.
the linen is colored.
Yes.
And
yes.
and so we're still trying to figure out how that worked. But whatever it is, if that's a layer, then there's only one layer.
One,
And
yes.
and so the now so really everything we know about the Shroud is really contrary to Leonardo's style.
Absolutely contrary. Another thing which is absolutely contrary, that he had this notebooks, a whole series of them, which he wrote from right to left, so that you could read it only with holding a mirror to it,
Okay.
so that nobody could read what he wrote. But everything was entered into it. He bought some laces for his pupil, Solaino. It's very neatly written. I bought today shoelaces for Solaino, 1 lira or something, whatever was the money at the time. So that he paints a painting like the Shroud, and he doesn't enter one single word in his little diary.
So in all of his very detailed documentation that
Yeah.
he kept of everything else that he did,
never-
there's
yeah.
no mention of
No
him ever
mention,
doing anything
no
like
mention.
like
Then
the Shroud.
all his creations. Now, he was a great scientist. There is no question about it. But all what he created, the airplane, all kinds of optical instruments, all kinds of war instruments, huge war instruments, none of them worked.
So none of them
one.
worked.
Yeah.
So you just had
So
ideas, but those are ideas that weren't really totally
Yes.
fleshed out. They were
So he was this greatest of all artists, because he was the greatest failure mankind ever knew. He never finished anything. Maybe the Mona Lisa is the only thing which he sort of finished, and it's everything.
Well, did he finish the Last Supper?
It's an arguable point. I really don't think so, because he already started to see the disintegration, the paint flaking off and things like that.
Right.
And he
So
was
others
so,
have had to come in and actually
well,
restore
maybe
it.
nobody would dare to touch it.